Well, the experience of the Ulster Division at the Somme is one that's burned deep into the Ulster Protestant psyche. And to sort of step back from that for a moment, we should say that the actions of the Ulster Division at the Somme stand out as some of the most impressive of any of the British formations that fight on the 1st of July 1916. The Ulster Division manages to make impressive advances and manages to penetrate into the Schwaben Redoubt, a key German defensive position on the Somme. This at a time when the 29th Division, just to the north of it, a pre-war regular division, despite the high number of it, they had managed to make no advance at all, essentially coming up against uncut barbed wire. And to the south of them, the 32nd Division, another new army division, had been held up entirely by the enemy machine guns in Thiepval village. So the fact that the Ulster Division is able to make an advance is an impressive one. The reasons why they do that are an interesting one. In the sort of Ulster Protestant myth, this is all the idea that this is the 1st of July, so it's all linked to the Boyne, so morale is high, men are going over the top wearing orange sashes and so on. There's actually very little evidence for that. There's no evidence that myself or any other historians managed to turn up that's convincing about the idea of men wearing orange sashes, and I think you would have had to have taken a very optimistic view of what the Germans were going to do to wear an orange sash as you went over the top, providing an incredibly visible target for the enemy. And really why the Ulster Division does so well is because they adopt to some degree French tactics, but also that they realise that they're going to face a very, very difficult situation. So some divisions in the British Army are given these very, very silly speeches that the artillery will essentially have wiped out the German positions and all they'll have to do is march forward as if on parade to occupy them, whereas that's not what's said for the Ulster Division. And a lot of this comes back to their commander, Major General Oliver Nugent, who was from County Cavan and had commanded the Cavan Ulster Volunteer Force Regiment just before the outbreak of the war. On the outbreak of war, he's recalled to the colours. He had retired from the army in early 1914 as a full colonel. He's recalled, initially put in charge of a territorial brigade which sees service in the Western Front in 1915, and then from being seen to have performed very well with that, he's given command of the Ulster Division. And Nugent certainly isn't the archetypical donkey that we get the impression of many British generals being. He carries out aerial reconnaissance of the German positions, goes up in an aircraft himself to get a sense of what he's up against, and comes up with quite an innovative plan. His plan is that the division would simply advance up the Ancre Valley, outflanking the key German position at the Schwaben Redoubt. But he's told that no, they can't do that because then this would leave the 32nd Division exposed and that they have to occupy the Schwaben Redoubt and manage to take that. So what the Ulster Division is given to do on the 1st of July is a very tough nut and against Nugent's own interests. What they have in terms of support, which some other units don't, are 2 regiments of French artillery. So they have their own artillery and they have the French gunners. And they then seem to have used a creeping barrage. So whereas most British units don't get out of their trenches until the barrage stops and then make their way over no man's land, the Ulster Division were getting out into no man's land before the barrage lifted, and then as soon as the artillery guns stopped, they advanced a short distance to the German lines and occupied them. So whereas elsewhere German gunners get a chance to get out of their deep redoubts and set up their machine guns, and a lot of parts of the front line of the Ulster Division this doesn't happen. Having said that, this is a very, very bloody operation for the Ulster Division. They suffer around 5,500 casualties, around 2,000 dead on the 1st of July, so this comes at a very high loss. And of course at the end of the day, because the 32nd Division and the 29th Division hadn't managed to occupy their parts of the front line, the Ulster Division is left in a very exposed position. They couldn't be reinforced because no man's land was being enfiladed by machine gun fire, and they had to withdraw at that point. So the Ulster Division makes a very, very significant advance, one of the best of any British Army units on the 1st of July, but this can't be supported and can't be consolidated by other British units, which is really the problem of it. Very soon after this, the 1st of July starts to enter the Ulster Unionist psyche as a key memorial event. and we start to get the great demonstrations in Belfast linked to the 1st of July, which start, it seems, as early as 1917, and certainly that's a fixture of the calendar all the way through post-war. The battle is also an interesting one in terms of official commemoration in Northern Ireland, because when the Northern Ireland government comes up with the idea of a war memorial, they decide that they're going to build it on the Somme battlefields at Tapeville village. And this is interesting because in many ways it gets around a lot of those political problems by having the memorial actually in France rather than in Northern Ireland itself, but also it links the service of Ulstermen in the First World War entirely to the Battle of the Somme, so links this all into this Ulster Protestant volunteering tradition. And it's often forgotten that Tapeville Memorial is the first British war memorial to be constructed on the Somme battlefields. It's unveiled in November 1921 by Field Marshal Sir Henry Wilson, a prominent supporter of the Unionist cause, Unionist MP for North Down, to be assassinated by the IRA in the spring of 1922, of course, and in the presence of Edward Carson. And we can then see that as fitting into a creation myth almost about the Northern Ireland state, that this flags up the idea that the British government, British people owe Ulster Unionists a debt of honour for the part that they had played in the Great War, and that's a recurring theme, it seems, in negotiations between the Northern Ireland government at Stormont and the British government over various taxation, subsidies and so on in the interwar period. So we get it played out at that level. Later on, the situation becomes a little more confused, I suppose, in terms of the commemoration of the Somme, because this is used as a cross-community measure. To some degree, we see this in the activity of the Somme Association that's set up in the early 1990s, but also in the school curriculum in Northern Ireland. So there is an idea there that the Battle of the Somme can be used as a reconciliation method. So a lot is made of the fact that you've got the 36th Ulster Division at Tapeville on the 1st of July, but you also have the 16th Irish Division serving at Guillemont and Ginchy in September 1916. So a lot is made of the connections between that. It seems fairly problematic in many ways. This sort of idea that you unify people in Northern Ireland by espousing what a great idea it was to go to France and kill lots of Germans always seems a rather odd way to go about things, and certainly in the context of playing up the European Union links, of which a lot was being made in the early 90s, that looked a little strange. But there's also that sort of Protestant volunteering myth that continues on. So whenever you're over in the Somme battlefields, you will still see groups of bandsmen and so on going over, and one imagines getting a fairly unreconstructed talk about the glories of the Orange Order on the 1st of July. And that throws up problems with the Orange Order as well, because they have their own memorial that's constructed at the back of the Tapeville Memorial. And this then seems to be a great problem in that the original memorial is suggesting that everyone is more or less equal, but this Orange Order one then privileges members of the Orange Order over all those others who died, and then maintains this myth that men do go over the top wearing sashes and so on. On that, I should of course say that Lord Farnham's letters to his wife are interesting, because he is aware of the 1st of July and its significance to the Orange tradition, but some veterans that were interviewed that served in the ranks say this was very, very far from their minds, or they hadn't really connected the 12th of July with the 1st of July, the old and new calendars and so on, and really just thought that this was going to be a very difficult operation, and weren't really making those links with Orangeism at all.